It's Monday, August 19th, 2019. My name is Ashton Ellett. I'm joined today by Sheryl Vogt, Director of the Richard B. Russell Library, and we're here with a very special installment of the Two-Party Georgia Oral History Project sponsored by the Richard B. Russell Library at the University of Georgia. Joining us today is Mrs. Maxine Goldstein. We're here at her home in beautiful Asheville, North Carolina. Her list of awards, accomplishments, and experiences in Georgia civic and political life is far too long to enumerate here, so we're going to go ahead and get started. Thank you very much, Maxine, for having us both here today.
Thank you for coming.
Well, it is an honor and a privilege for sure, and we appreciate your hospitality. I wonder if we could get started just by telling us a little bit about your childhood and your family and your upbringing.
I was born in Augusta, Georgia, many, many years ago, 1926 to be exact, which means I'm going to be 93 this coming Sunday, August the 25th. I had a brother who's no longer with us, I'm sorry to say. My father ran a distribution tire company and a filling station. He also ran for city council and was elected 2 terms. He was never a really healthy man, and so after 2 terms, I think he'd had enough politics and he retired. But that was my first real taste of politics.
So, what about your mother? Who was your mother?
My mother was Sadie Rabinowitz Shapiro. She was a housewife, but she loved to play cards and mahjong and things like that, and did her best to raise 2 children. And that's about what I can say about her. She was a wonderful person.
So, you grew up, tell me about the Jewish community in Augusta. Was it a sizable community?
Oh, yes, it was. It wasn't the largest. It wasn't like Atlanta.
Sure.
But it was pretty large. There were 2 congregations, the Reform and the Orthodox. We belonged to the Orthodox. I don't know what else to tell you except there were many families. I don't know how many. I don't remember.
So, did the Orthodox community and the Reform community, were they very close, or were they divided communities?
We didn't fight each other.
Well, that's good. That's good. So, you said your father ran for city council. What got him interested in politics?
What was the name of? There was a certain name for the Democrats in those years.
The Cracker Party?
That's it. Thank you. I must explain to everybody that my memory is not what it used to be. I'm sorry.
That is
but
perfectly
I'll just do my best.
So the Cracker Party with Roy Harris. I'm assuming, correct me if I'm wrong, your father was not a part of the Cracker Party, or was he?
Was he? I didn't hear you. I'm sorry.
Was he part of the Cracker Party? Was he
I
one
think
of
he had to be a part to be elected, to run and be elected.
I see. So they were Democrats, not Republicans.
Yeah, that's right.
Did you know any Republicans growing up?
Oh, well, I never asked.
All right. So, do you think your parents' politics had a lasting influence over you, or did you have discussions at dinner time about politics?
No, we did not. I just knew that we were Democrats, loyal Democrats.
Right. So tell me about Augusta growing up in the 1920s and 30s.
Well, it was a small town. It was hot in the summer. They're worried up here it's going to be 100 and something. Well, I'm used to that. But Augusta, they had a nice downtown business community. There were many churches of different denominations. I don't know what else you would like to know. There was a nice high school. Mm-hmm. The boys went to one and the girls went to another. We did get together, though, I promise you.
Well, I won't ask any more about that.
All right. Okay.
So what high school did you go to?
Tubman.
Tubman High School?
Tubman High School.
So growing up, going to Tubman High School, what were your future plans, your future aspirations?
Well, I wanted to go off to school when I got out of high school, and the University of Georgia was the one I wanted to aim for. And I always liked to entertain people. I used to do in fact, I'm still doing them, believe it or not, record pantomimes. I did it at the theaters downtown on Saturday morning when they had kids shows. I just did them everywhere in Augusta and did them at the University of Georgia.
Tell me, I'm not familiar with pantomimes. What?
You play a record, and when you have no voice, which I do not have a voice, you just mouth the words and put some action with it, and that's what a pantomime is.
So what got you interested in that?
Well, everybody was singing beautifully, and I couldn't, and I listened to the records, and I started mouthing the words, and that's how it started.
So I read somewhere you attended Augusta Junior College, which
Yes.
is now Augusta University,
Yes.
but back then it was a 2-year school. What did you study while you were at Augusta?
Preparing to go to the University of Georgia.
So what was your major? What was your area of study?
Radio. We didn't have we were just starting television. I remember there was one night they called me in and said, we're going to do a television shoot, and enjoyed doing it, but my major was radio, and I had a radio program in Augusta for a year or so before I married, and then I moved to Milledgeville, and I also had a ladies radio show there. We aimed to keep the women happy in those days.
So tell me about your radio shows. You just said that you don't have a voice for singing, but you had a voice for radio.
Well, it went over, thank goodness.
Well, good, good. So what did those radio shows entail? Did you
Well,
do
I just
interviews?
asked different people in the community that people knew, and they may turn in and listen to their friends talk, and then I would also bring in special guests each week. It was a weekly.
Who was the most special guest you ever got to interview?
I'm sorry, I can't answer that.
Okay. So you always planned on transferring to the University of Georgia
Yes,
in Athens.
yes.
So once you transfer to Athens, I assume this is radio journalism is what your major was. Tell me about moving from Augusta to Athens. What was Athens like at the time?
Well, Athens was a smaller town than
Right.
Augusta, and it was a very nice town. I had no problems. I made friends, joined a sorority, Delta Phi Epsilon. It was through meeting people that I met my husband. That's a funny story that I'd like to just tell you.
Absolutely.
We had a mutual friend who tried to put us together for a long time, but I was busy, he was busy, we never got together. So one night, Tommy Dorsey was playing at the University of Georgia. I was dancing with this nice fella, and there was a tap on the shoulder, and our mutual friend Harry said, "Jake, this is Maxine," and he turned and ran away. And I looked at Jake and I said, "I hate your guts." He said, "Sugar, what did I do to you? I heard all those things you said about me." Anyhow, 3 weeks later, we were pinned.
That's a very quick transition from "I hate your guts"
That's right.
to have exchanging pins.
Yeah.
So, a quick courtship. What attracted you to your husband, Jake?
He was a good dancer, and he had a wonderful sense of humor.
And I can already tell that's extremely important if we're going to hang around with Maxine.
That's right.
So tell me about campus life.
It was I was living, can't remember the name of the building, I'm very sorry.
Nah, no worries.
But I eventually moved into the sorority house. But Charlie Trippy was the football star in those days.
Right, yeah.
And he was always near the place that I can't remember, and we would talk in the daytime when he was over there, and just got to know people like that, and it was just a lot of fun. We actually studied, and I only had one bad experience at Georgia. In those days, we didn't come up with our cars. We just didn't have cars to come up with, but everybody traveled with this.
Hitchhiking.
That's right. And one day, and I'd done it many times, one day I did this, and this man stops, and he says, "You need a lift?" I said, "Yes." He said, "Where are you going?" I told him to the sorority house. He said, "Well, get in." I got in. I wasn't in the car 2 minutes when he unzipped his pants.
Whoa.
I said, stop this car and let me out right now. Nothing happened. I said, I want you to know that my father is mayor of Athens, Georgia, and you better let me out. And wow, he pulled over and let me out in a hurry.
Oh, it's funny now.
Oh, it's
I mean,
funny
that's a
now,
funny
but
now.
it was scary.
Right.
I ended up having to go to the dean's office because somebody had told the dean that had happened to me.
Right.
And there were other girls that were all there that night to talk with the dean. So
That is a scary, So, did you have more positive experiences on campus?
yeah, I met my husband there.
Right. Okay. Was there an active Jewish community on campus?
Yes.
There was.
There were 2 Jewish sororities, and I know there were 2 or 3 fraternities.
Now, I've read somewhere that you attended the Hedgerow Theater School of Dramatic Arts.
I sure did.
Was that before or after?
This was before any of this.
This was before any of this. Okay.
Yes.
Well, let's take a step back and talk about your theatrical training, I
Well, I
guess.
used to enjoy being in plays as a young girl. I not only did what went on the stage, I was backstage sometimes doing makeup or just other things. And I've always just liked theater. And then when I got into the pantomimes, it was even more fun because I was out there all by myself and not with a cast.
Right. So this was, this would have been during the big band era
Oh,
of
yes.
music.
Yes.
Tell us about your experiences traveling and doing,
Well, the main
doing shows there.
2 things that I really remember. Harry James's band was playing in Atlantic City, and I was in Atlantic City, and I was contacted to do my pantomimes when the band took their break. So you can almost say I appeared with Harry James, but I didn't. But anyway, it was a lot of fun. And then from there, that very same summer, I went to Philadelphia and appeared in a nightclub. Don't ask me its name, I'm sorry. But Abbott and Costello were there. And they liked my act, and they actually asked me to go to Hollywood with them. Well, being a nice little Jewish girl from Augusta, Georgia, I called my daddy and asked him what I should do. He says, "You're not going to Hollywood." I didn't argue with him or anything, and I said, okay. So I went back and told them, and they were so disappointed, But anyway, I didn't go, and it was the best thing that ever happened because I've had a wonderful life without Hollywood.
So you met your husband on campus. Did you graduate before you were married?
No, I never actually graduated.
Okay.
I had 3 years of college.
Okay.
That's why I don't know everything.
Right. So you got married September 1st, 1947.
That's correct.
Where did you get married at?
In the synagogue in Augusta. It was so hot. It was the days before they air conditioned any place. The candles were standing up straight, and before the ceremony was over, they were bent over like that.
Obviously you can't tell how hot it is watching this on film, but it is extremely hot in Asheville, and it's hotter in Athens.
Yes.
So it's one of those dog days of summer.
Right.
So I know exactly what
But
you're
it's
talking
a
about.
wonderful day. I'm so glad you came.
Well, we are glad to be here. So you got married in Augusta and moved to Milledgeville.
Milledgeville, where my husband's family owned a department store. It's interesting about that. His father came over from Europe and became a peddler. Those were people that went out with packs on their back and walked the streets in different communities to try to make some money for their family. His Jake's mother, Celia, we called her Sippy, she lived in Macon at that time. But in part of that time, after that, they moved to Milledgeville. But he would travel with this pack on his back, and this is interesting. He was at the place that sold the goods to the peddlers, and he noticed one day after peddling around Atlanta, not doing as good as he'd like, there was one man that was buying a lot of stuff. So he said, I knew something was going on, so I asked the man that owned the company where did he pedal? And he said, around Milledgeville, Georgia. So Papa said, okay. He bought his merchandise, caught the bus, I think it was. He started pedaling in Milledgeville. He pedaled, he did so well, he ended up opening a store in Milledgeville, a small store. Eventually it became a big, big department store. Milledgeville's leading department store, Goldstein's. It is no longer in service.
So it was always in the plans to, after you got married, move back to Milledgeville. Where
Well, I never lived in Milledgeville.
no, or move to
Moved
Milledgeville.
to Milledgeville, right.
What was Jake going to work in?
Oh, he
in
did.
the store?
He worked with his father.
C. Goldstein and Sons.
Mm-hmm.
So tell me about Milledgeville. What was Milledgeville like in the 40s
Well,
and 50s?
I had never been in such a small town to live, actually, but the people there were so wonderful. The family, the Goldstein family, were so well accepted by everybody that I had no problem. It just worked out fine. The city mothers instead of the city fathers, they sort of took good care of me, and I got to know everybody, and I got active in all the different organizations and things, and my life in Milledgeville was wonderful.
So how did you get involved? I was looking at an old resume of yours, and the list of civic clubs was about this long, and I told Sheryl, I said, there's only 24 hours in the day, but Maxine seems to have found more.
Well, the first thing I did, and I advise all the people, the young women who are watching this, if they can, to ask your husband, is it okay if you do it? Don't just say, somebody calls you and say, would you like to be treasurer? Say, yeah, don't say yes, even for that. Always say, is it okay with you, sugar, if I become treasurer or try to run for that office or do something like that? He never said no. He was always wonderful. And so that's how I felt good. I had 2 children. I had Marcia and Harriet. I have my daughter, I'm living up here with her, not in her house, but she's close by. And she's the one that's living. Harriet passed away with breast cancer. And so many people watching this have got family members that have lost people like that, so you know what I feel on that subject. But anyway, what was your question?
Well, what were some of those clubs that were near and dear to your heart in Milledgeville?
Well, the Civic Women's Club, I started that one. And the Women's Club, I think I started that one. Those are the 2 main ones, I think, that I can recall right now. If you mention something, I'll tell you all about it.
Well, that's 2 that I wanted to talk about. What does the Milledgeville Women's Club, what kind of work, what sort of activities?
We did things that were needed, like charitable things, you know. We'd raise money for different charities. We also belonged to the national women's clubs, the state women's clubs, and they had their own projects, and we always supported their projects.
Do you know if those organizations are still active today?
I don't know about the Civic Women's Club in Milledgeville. I doubt that seriously. But the Georgia Federation of Women's Clubs, I'm sure, must still be in existence, but I can't say for sure.
So in addition to that, you were a member of the Milledgeville Hadassah?
Yes, we had a Hadassah chapter. We didn't have quite enough members to form a chapter, so we called over to Sandersville, which was 30 miles away.
Right.
And we imported a few women on our meeting days, and we had a Hadassah chapter in Milledgeville.
Now, is that a similar type club, a charitable organization
It
just
is,
made
and
up
it was
of
a Jewish
women?
organization, and we did the work that they asked us to do and supported them.
So when did you get involved with the Anti-Defamation League?
I really think it was more when I was active in the Democratic Party.
Let's see. You also, it looks like the Milledgeville Little Theater.
Oh yes, I started that. Believe it or not.
Tell me about the Little Theater.
Oh, we had it. We had a wonderful, wonderful group of people that were so happy to do something like that in Milledgeville because they had never had a little theater group. And we put on productions, and it just went real well. It was well accepted, so I was happy about that.
Was the college would have been a all-female school at the time.
At that time, yeah.
It was the
But then
normal college, right?
Changed.
Right. So did you do any activities with the women at the college?
Not really. I was more active in my later life there on the not the board of directors, but I was very active on several committees at the college.
You were also active in the garden club?
Yes, I was. I love flowers. I don't like to plant them. I like to arrange them. And I became a flower show judge.
Oh, wow.
And it was a wonderful experience. I met some great ladies in Georgia and had a wonderful time. I was active in that organization for well over 32 years.
What's your favorite flower?
Right now I'm going to say zinnias. Well, you can't see them, but my daughter raises them, and I've got the house full of zinnias. Don't tell anybody, but those are artificial.
Well, I won't tell
I would
anybody
be
if you
kicked
don't.
out if they knew I had artificial flowers.
I think once you reach emeritus status, you can do
Yeah.
artificial flowers. Besides, you didn't plant them; you're arranging
Right.
them. All right. So what did you? Because a lot of this interview is going to be about your political career and your political activities. What did you learn about politics from these civic clubs and civic organizations, which aren't really supposed to be political?
No, they're not. But when I was active in the garden club, we wanted to get rid of billboards.
Tell me about that. That is anybody who knows Georgia history and the Georgia politics and economic development, the war between the billboards and the developers and environmental groups, that's always been a struggle. Tell us about that.
Well, for some reason, I had met a few of the legislators, and I was in charge of, I don't remember what committee's name was, but it fell into that committee to try to get rid of some of those billboards. So I went through, it was all done through the garden club.
Right.
And I contacted a few of the people that I knew in the legislature, plus Culver Kidd, who was a big politician in Milledgeville.
The Silver Fox.
The Silver Fox, he was my buddy. Anyway, he helped me round up enough legislators to come to a meeting that I conducted in the Capitol. He found me a room, and we talked to them about getting rid of the billboards. Not just myself, I had other people there to help. We weren't successful. I'm sorry. We tried.
Well, what was your complaint about the billboards?
Well, they just weren't too pretty sometimes. We'd rather see trees and flowers and things like that. And if you'll notice here in North Carolina, the highways are very nice.
They are. So did your interest in politics, your dad had been in the city council or had run for city council, but you said you didn't grow up in a really political family in terms of discussion. So how did you get active in party politics?
Aha! Well, the Goldstein family in Milledgeville never ran for office, but they were always political behind the scenes, with the cash and working for them. But one night there was going to be a Democratic Party function in Macon, Georgia, and Jake says, well, let's go. I said, okay. So we went. And one of the people there that night was Marge Thurman. And the minute I met Marge Thurman, for some unknown reason, we clicked. That very night, she had appointed me to the State Democratic Committee.
Oh, wow.
The very night. And from then on, our friendship grew. She was my mentor. She pushed me into many directions and took care of me the whole time I was there. Of course, we lost Marge, and that was a sad occasion to all of us, not just me. But she was a wonderful leader of the Democratic Party, and she really kept me on the right road.
So what year did you say what year you met Marge Thurman and when she...
I'm sorry. Don't get too technical.
No. So I actually don't know too much about Marge Thurman. Tell me about, she was chairwoman of the party
Oh, yeah, for many years.
1974 until she passed away in the early 80s. Tell me about her style, and how she rose to be such a prominent player in Georgia politics.
Well, first I'd say she was a very smart lady, and she knew how to play politics, and she tried not to make enemies. And I don't know how else to describe her except to say that she did everything she could to lead the Democratic Party down the right road.
So you said the Goldsteins were politically active. Was your husband also interested in
yes,
politics?
He never ran for office or anything, but he supported me every step of the way. But again, I never took on a job without getting his permission first and getting him to open his pocketbook occasionally.
So, you know, with politics, some people are interested in local politics or county politics, which are really important in Georgia, still are, probably more so back then. Were you interested mainly at the state level or?
Well, I was always interested in what happened in Milledgeville because it affected us.
Sure.
And but I was more active in state politics.
I saw where you're the founder of the Baldwin County Democratic Women's Club.
Yes.
So this seems to be a trend that Maxine founds these influential organizations for women especially. Tell me about that, bringing together people in your community, which you were familiar with.
Well, we announced in the paper. And I think there was something said on the radio that there would be a meeting that night someplace. I don't remember where, my friend. But for women who were interested in being part of the Democratic Party of Women in Milledgeville. And we had a wonderful turnout. And that's how that started. Now, I didn't become the president of that, as I can recall. But we had people who were active and were that way. And we started pushing women to run for office. That was a very important thing. And some of them did, but they weren't very successful in those days.
And far more successful these days, with Georgia Win List and organizations like that. So you said that the night you met Marge Thurman is the night you were put on the state central committee for the Democratic Party.
And we neither one had a drink yet.
Well, there you go. So what were you interested? What did you hope to achieve in the state Democratic Party?
I was just flattered, darling. I didn't go so philosophical. I was just flattered that I was asked. And I met some wonderful people, and whatever they wanted to do, I always supported them, if I thought it was kosher.
Right. So did you work on campaigns as well? Did you knock on doors?
I led a peanut brigade to Waukesha, Wisconsin. It took a while to learn how to say Waukesha, but we got there, and we did. We knocked on doors. We managed a little office with a telephone that kept ringing off, and everybody wanted to know all about Jimmy Carter. And we told them what we knew, and then they started saying, well, if we vote for him, can we have a job in Washington? And I wasn't going to lie to them. I said, well, you work real hard and get him president, and then you'll have to work it from there, because I can't make those kind of promises.
Well, we'll talk about the Peanut Brigade and Jimmy Carter, but how did you get involved with Jimmy Carter to begin with? Did you know him as governor?
Met him before he ran for president in Jacksonville, Florida. I was down visiting my brother, Philip Shapiro, and we just happened to be in a hotel lobby and talking, the two of us, and he walked over and introduced himself and said he was Jimmy Carter, and he was going to be running for office for president. And we talked to him for about maybe 15 or 20 minutes, just the two of us, and we told him we would support him, and we did.
Now, he had been governor of Georgia.
Yes.
Do you remember his campaign for governor?
I don't remember.
Okay. So you go from a hotel lobby in Jacksonville, Florida, which is a perfect Jimmy Carter story, because of course that's how you would meet Jimmy Carter, is just a random off chance in a hotel room. You go from there to walking through what I imagine was cold weather in Waukesha, Wisconsin.
Ooh, was it ever?
In 1976.
This Georgia peach lost all her fuzz up there.
Well, at least you weren't like poor Dot Paget up in New Hampshire. And
Oh no, it was bad enough though. It really was.
So, tell me about how you got involved with the Peanut Brigade. Tell me how you joined.
Well, I was with the
group.
Democratic Party, active then, and we were just to support Jimmy, and they were going to get up these peanut brigades to go to different places, and of course I volunteered.
What was Jake's reaction when you told him you were going to Waukesha, Wisconsin?
He
and
was
knock
wonderful.
On...
He just took care of the kids, and I went.
I was getting ready to say, did he come with you?
No, he did a lot of things with me, but not the Peanut Brigade, with just women. I think it was about 8 of us, or 9, I'm not sure.
So what was the strategy for the Peanut Brigade? What were you
To
going
get
up?
people to know Jimmy Carter and to let them know that he was a fine, upstanding gentleman, and we did our best, and I think we took that part of the country.
Now, is it true that the Peanut Brigade members had to pay their own way?
Absolutely. I paid my way for everything. I never was. The only thing I got treated to is when the state chairs were invited to Taiwan.
Oh, really?
And that was a wonderful trip. I enjoyed it. And really, they took care of us. But and I was vice chair at that time.
Right.
And it was just, that's the only time I really didn't spend any money.
Right, because I know a big part of politics are conventions and everything. We'll talk about conventions, but most of that's pay your own way. Because
Yes, right.
There's not
Everything
really the
is.
money for that kind of thing. So who were some of the people who worked with you on the Carter campaign? Who were some of your friends that you worked with? Do you remember?
Well, there's one that I really wish I could remember her name, but I cannot. But she and I were, I hate to say this, we're very good friends, but when you get to be 92, going on 93, you're going to find out you got a few quirks up here. I'm sorry. But I do remember some things. Melba Williams was one that and Dot Paget, and just people like that. They were great friends, and we just had a good time. And we enjoyed what we did. It wasn't a hardship.
Right. So 1976, that's your first Democratic National Convention that you attend. That's in New York City?
I think it was.
I think it's New York City. We can check these things, but my phone's across the room. So yes, that's right, because the Republicans were in Kansas City at Kemper Arena. So New York City, Madison Square Garden.
Right.
Jimmy Carter,
Right.
governor of Georgia, is going to be nominated, or former governor of Georgia. Busbee was governor at the time. What was it like at the Democratic National Convention?
It was wonderful. We had a good time. We really did. And we were proud of Jimmy Carter. We really were. And I think that was the first hat I ever made for my conventions. I took an old straw hat out of Goldstein's, Milledgeville's leading department store, and sewed peanuts on it. And it was full of peanuts. And I saw how much attention that got at that convention, and I went to 11 conventions. I knew this was a perfect way to get some attention for Georgia. And my great nephew, he helped me to do all the rest of my hats. He's passed away, unfortunately. Marvin Gordon was his name. And I would give him the ideas, and he would work them out. A lot of my hats were battery operated.
Oh, God.
And they would move, and they would do this and that and the other. And they were just wonderful, and they're in different places around the country now. And
I know we have at least one at the Russell Library. The Carter Center has one in Atlanta.
Yes.
And I think the Smithsonian.
the Smithsonian, that's the first hat that I ever gave away. I was on the floor with this hat. It wasn't that fancy or anything, but they liked it. The man came down and he says, I want to ask you a question. I represent the Smithsonian. And I'm looking at him, yeah. He says, we would like you to donate your hat. I said, absolutely, but I'm not going to give it to you now because the photographers are still taking pictures.
But you agree, and that's where, if we go up to Washington, that's where the hats with the peanuts.
Yeah, that's right. No, this was not the peanut hat that went there. It was, maybe it was. Wait, I've seen the hat. I cannot tell you which one it was, but I gave them to out in California. I gave them up north. I gave them wherever they asked for them. They got them.
Right.
And I just don't know what else to tell you about the hats, but he did a good job. We didn't always win the election, but we sure won the hats.
That's right. Well, I've watched many conventions, and I don't know if you were the first hat lady, but you've been imitated ever since, because they've gotten to be
They called me the hat lady. They did. I don't know. That's better than some other things they could have called me.
Sure. So, 1976, Jimmy Carter's successful, wins the presidency, defeats Gerald Ford to become president. Did you go up to Washington to the inauguration?
Yeah, I went to the inauguration, of course, and all the big parties and everything. And this is interesting to me, but after Mr. Carter was elected, later, was invited to the White House for this big social, dancing and blah, blah, blah. And they want to know what I'd like to drink. And I said, I'd love a glass of red wine. Oh, no, we don't serve red wine because it will stain the carpet if you spill it. We can give you white wine. I said, well, give it to me.
So how many inaugural balls? Because that's one of the things people try and outdo the other for how many balls they attend.
I went to most of them, especially those that were close by.
Right. So, you came back to Georgia. What was your assessment of Jimmy Carter as president?
Of his presidency?
Yes.
I thought he was an honest man. He tried his best. He just got hooked up with the wrong thing there at the end, and that's what ruined it. Otherwise, I do think he would have been reelected. Mm-hmm. And I got to know his mother, Miss Lillian, very well.
Tell me about Miss Lillian.
Oh, she was a charming
one of
lady.
A kind.
I met her. I never knew her before I got involved with Jimmy. Mm-hmm. And we would meet at all the meetings. And she finally started asking me to go to her hotel room with her. And we would sit there for maybe a half hour and talk on different occasions. Mm-hmm. And she was such a lovely lady. I missed her.
Now, did you also get to know Rosalind Carter at all?
Not as well as I knew Jimmy's mother,
right.
But I knew Rosalind. Mm-hmm. When I was head of the Georgia Democratic Women, we gave a big banquet and dance in her honor, and some New York designer sent me a dress, and other women that were involved in the Democratic Party, higher up echelon, sent us dresses to wear. Well, when I saw my dress, I was ready to cry. It was striped, orange, black, with artificial, one sleeve you put on here, and one sleeve you put on here, and it was horrible looking. But I made the best of it. I got up there and pretended I was wearing the most gorgeous dress in the world. Then I was so lucky they let us have our dresses.
Well, you're very kind for not sharing the name of the designer. They would love it so much, I'm sure. So in 1980, you were actually a member of the Electoral College.
Yes, I was.
Tell me how you went from meeting Marge Thurman at a dinner party to becoming an elector in Georgia.
I was in the right position. I was vice chair of the party, so
okay.
I automatically got there. But I can tell you one funny story about that. 12 o'clock, high noon, in every state capital that Saturday morning. We're sitting there. Everybody's there but one person. And she was noted for being late. And finally, God, her name left me and I've got it on my mind. Isn't that awful? Can you cut that for a minute?
I sure can.
Mrs. King.
So tell me about your experience casting your electoral vote.
Well, all of us who could cast the vote were to be at the state capitol all over the country at a certain time. I think it was high noon. And everybody from the Georgia delegation was there except one person. And it got to be a few minutes wait, but we decided to start and go ahead with it. And then Coretta Scott King came in late, but she was noted for being late. She was always late, they said, but I was not always with her, so I'm not sure. And she came in and she sat down and she said, I guess we have to vote for Jimmy Carter, don't we? She sat next to me. I said, if you want to get out of here with your head, you better.
Well, that ruins the next question I was going to ask, who you voted for. So I guess that answers that question.
That answered it, my friend.
So we'll take a step back because...
But incidentally on that, she was just joking when she asked that. I want that to be clear.
Sure. So you mentioned that you got to be an elector because you were vice chair of the party.
Yes, I think that's the reason.
How did you become vice chair of the party? Why did you that's a position you have to run for
I
at
ran
the state
for it.
convention.
The governor and March Thurman and Tom Murphy. He
Speaker
became my
Murphy.
friend, a really good friend. He would come down to some of the big meetings and he says, no, there's going to be an election and I want you all to vote for Maxine Goldstein for vice chair. They offered me the chairmanship at one time, but I wouldn't take it.
Really? When was that offer?
I don't know. In the past.
In the past. Good answer. So,
I'm sorry I can't help you with all your specific questions.
We can look these things up.
You can.
It's more about getting everything else into the record. So tell me, did you decide to run for state vice chair or were you
it
drafted
was brought to
into
me
it?
probably by Marge Thurman. I
Sure.
don't know.
So what does the vice chair do?
Well, first thing, she has to be a good diplomat because things come up and you've got to take a side and you try to do it in a good way, not to hurt anybody. And she's there to push forward the Democratic Party ideals and things that they want to do. It's a fun job.
Well, do you remember any of those incidents where you had to be a diplomat?
Just about every time we met.
Nobody fights like friends, is that right?
That's right.
So as vice chair, were you also a member of the Democratic National Committee?
Oh, yes, I was. And I was on their executive committee.
Mm-hmm. So do you remember how long you were a member on the
10 years.
10 years? Okay, so on the executive committee, the Democratic National Committee, this would have been in the 1980s, I guess. So tell me what you're trying to do or what you were doing on the Democratic National Committee. What role did you have?
Well, I tried to do what I thought was right for Georgia, was my number one place. And then I tried to do what they wanted to do with the National Committee. And there was never many conflicts there, never.
Do you remember the chairman that you served under at the Democratic National Committee? Who the chairmen were?
It could have been Paul Kirk, but I'm not sure. I just don't know.
That looks like Paul Kirk would have been 85 to 89. So Paul Kirk of Massachusetts, and maybe Charles Mannett from California.
He might have been part of that too, but he was before Paul Kirk.
Yes. Yeah, because after that was you get up Ron Brown and whoever Bill Clinton had in charge when he was president. So one of the important committees you served on was the Select Committee on Women's Issues.
Yes.
That would have been the high tide of trying to push through the
Equal Rights Amendment.
Words right out of my mouth.
Absolutely. I've worked on that with some wonderful Democratic women who were leaders in their own states, in their party, everything. We worked real hard. And this is another interesting thing, another name that I have forgotten. She was a secretary to some politician in Georgia at the time. The day they had the Equal Rights Amendment vote on the floor, she called me from the floor with a telephone, and I sat on my bed and I listened as the vote count went down. And it wasn't a good vote count for me because I wanted that to pass. But I thought that was something to be part of it through the telephone and to hear the votes and who voted yay and who voted nay.
How did you I assume you did a lot of lobbying down at under the Gold Dome, trying to push the Equal Rights Amendment.
Yeah.
How did you try to convince those legislators to
Well, I said,
vote?
you know, you got daughters and you got wives, and that was my theme. What else could I tell them? I had people in Milledgeville, prominent people, doctors, call me and say, why are you so interested in the Equal Rights Amendment? Y'all are fine. You don't need that. And I would say, well, I just kind of think I got a hunch we're going to need it, you know, or something like that. I'd try to pass it off. I wouldn't get angry with anybody.
Sure.
In Milledgeville, such a small town, you couldn't afford to get angry with anybody.
Do you remember any other issues that came before you when you were on that select committee for women's issues? That would have Equal Rights Amendment would have been
Well, probably the most outstanding one. Failure.
So you continued attending Democratic conventions, 80, 84, kept doing your hats. 1988 was a special Democratic National Convention because it was in Atlanta.
Oh, yes, yes,
And
yes.
you were part of the planning committee or the site selection
I was
committee.
on site selection. We went to many cities, and of course, we actually ended up at the Atlanta one, I think was last. But we visited lots of cities, and they had wonderful things to offer. And they came to Atlanta, and they liked what happened in Atlanta, and they were going to have to announce, I think it was real soon after the Atlanta visit, which city. Well, Jake was with me on a couple of these trips, but he certainly came to the function in Atlanta. And we're standing there talking, and this man was head of security for the conventions. And he came up and he says, Maxine, I want to ask you a question. What kind of a guarantee can you give me that we will have control of security in Atlanta and not the people in Atlanta? I said, exactly what are we talking about? He said, if I tell you that we will choose Atlanta, if I'm sure we can get that commitment, tell me. I said, I can guarantee it, you don't have any problems there. All night, I didn't sleep. As soon as we landed in Atlanta, I went to the phone, I called the governor, and I said, let me tell you. And also Andrew Young. I had to tell him. And they both agreed they could have complete control of security. It was fine with them, and that's what got it there. Now, I was not the only one working hard for Atlanta to get the convention. There were two others. Names have gone, I'm sorry. But they were very important. We worked together. But he didn't go to them about the security. He just came over to me and Jake. And I was so thrilled about that. The next day after I got home, I got a phone call from Andrew Young's office to come back to Atlanta the next day. And I was pooped, but I came back. And I remember they gave me this humongous bouquet of red roses and many thanks and a lot of publicity. And that was very nice.
Well, there was an organization put together. It was called Atlanta 88.
Yes.
Which I think it was Bobby Kahn, who would have been very close to Governor
yes.
Barnes, and also Gordon Giffen, who was very close to Senator Nunn.
Yes.
So I think those two were very prominent in the organization.
I'd forgotten these people. Thank you.
That's why they pay me the big bucks here. So I assume as a member of the site selection committee, it came up to a vote, and you probably voted for Atlanta to.
Well, I had to hesitate a minute.
Oh yeah.
Joke.
Right. But once it is in Atlanta, you're on the national arrangements committee for. That seems like a perfect fit for you, your experience, and your personality, which is making sure everybody is safe and having a good time at the convention. What made Atlanta a successful convention? We can put aside who was nominated.
Well, I think a lot of it is, first place, it's Southern hospitality. And I remember, it might have been during that time, at breakfast one morning, I was sitting next, it might have been earlier, I was sitting next to Tip O'Neill, but it happened in Atlanta. and for breakfast, and they came by and, would you like grits? I said, yes. And they asked Tip. He said, no. I said, oh, Tip, you've got to taste grits. One time, you're in the South. He said, all right, give me one.
One
I
grit.
just laughed my head off.
For anybody who doesn't know, Tip O'Neill was the Speaker of the House from Boston, Massachusetts.
Thank you.
So you came off the Democratic National Committee right around that convention. That probably would have been your last convention as a member of the
I think
executive
when Joe
committee.
Frank Harris went out, I went out.
Joe Frank would have left in 91 as
something
because
like
Zell,
that.
Zell
Yeah,
Miller
yeah.
ran for governor and
The
won.
convention was in '88, as I remember.
Correct. That was Michael Dukakis.
Yes.
Was the nominee that year. You continued attending conventions in the 90s. Were you a today is Bill Clinton's birthday. Were you a Clinton supporter?
Oh, yes, I
back in
was a
92?
Clinton supporter.
I know he had a lot of a very strong contingent of Georgians supporting his campaign.
And we really liked Hillary.
Well, we can talk about that in a little bit. I don't want to skip too far ahead.
Oh, I'm sorry.
Well, actually, 2008, was that your last convention?
It may have been. I went to 11, and I cannot tell you what the date was.
Did you go when Senator Obama was nominated? And so that would have been Denver.
The night, I think I was there for this reason. I can still remember shaking Michelle's hand. That's all I can remember. No, I remember more than that, but I remember that.
Sure. Do you have a favorite convention, or a favorite convention memory?
I really, well, it's not my favorite, but I can tell you a funny thing.
Sure.
In one of the conventions, I don't know where, but we were in somebody's disfavor, and they put us in the highest rafters that you could sit for the convention. Usually we were down on the floor, maybe a little bit up, but no problem. We were you get nosebleeds up there. And I'm sitting there, I'm on the next to last row, and I said, they just didn't treat us right. And everybody's in agreement, and all of a sudden I look behind me, and guess who's sitting there? Joe Lewis. I said, well, if it's good enough for Joe, it's good enough for me.
Did you remain active in Georgia politics even when you left the Democratic National Committee?
Well, locally, yes, but not nationally.
So what campaigns did you work on in the 1990s? Do you remember Zell Miller's campaigns?
Oh, yeah. I worked for Zell, yeah. Went to Israel with Zell and Shirley, Jake and I did.
Tell me about that.
That was a wonderful experience. Jake and I had been to Israel a couple of times as tourists, and it was wonderful. But when you go with the governor, honey, you've really done something there, because they treated him like royalty. And we saw things that we would never have seen otherwise, like security things and the Golan Heights and all that. And it was just wonderful.
So what would Zell Miller, a politician from the North Georgia mountains, what was he doing in Israel? What was it a
I guess they
development?
invited him to bring a delegation with him, and they showed him around and things like that. It was great.
So you were involved in an effort to teach lobbying techniques and such things to women in the 1990s. Billboards was a big one. What motivated you to do that, to try and teach a younger generation?
Oh, I don't really know how to answer that, but I felt like anything I could do to help the party helps everybody.
Mm-hmm. So over the course of your career in politics, you would have met and got to know several of Georgia's governors.
Yes.
So I just wonder if you could give us your thoughts and impressions about some of the governors.
Well, they were different. They
Sure.
were different. Their staff was different, but they were
Interesting.
all supportive of the governor, and they were supportive of me when I asked for things. They were just wonderful. And I don't know how to say anything except Georgia was very fortunate to have some darn good governors, Democratic.
So I guess the first governor you would have known and worked with would have been George Busbee.
I think that's right.
Busbee.
Yeah.
What do you remember? Governor Busbee gets sort of a bad rap as being boring.
He wasn't boring, but he was himself. That's how he conducted himself, conducted his campaign, everything else. He did good things. Boring people can do good things.
Well, and if anything, his successor, Joe Frank Harris,
Yes.
was accused of being more boring than George Busbee.
Well, that's all right. We'll take all the boring governors we can get because we moved Georgia forward.
And you've already talked about Zell Miller.
Yeah.
And did you ever work with or interact with Governor Barnes?
Not as much as the others, but I did a little, yes.
Right. And to this point, in 2019, he's Georgia's last Democratic governor. You were appointed to a number of boards and commissions by governors
Yes, I was.
over the years. I wonder if we could talk about a few of those.
If I can remember
If you
them.
can, sure, if you can remember. The Georgia State Commission on Indian Affairs.
Yes, when they called and asked me to serve on that commission, I actually laughed. I said, "We don't have Indians. What are you talking about?" Well, they did have Indians, and I learned that a Winnebago wasn't just an automotive thing, but it was a tribe. I also learned, which really turned me on, a lot of the chiefs were women. There were women. But we met, we had, the main thing we were doing with that commission, people were trying to say that they were Indian because the government was giving money to the Indians that were harmed in the past, trying to get through that. Well, we met and we went different places around the country. And the women, I was so surprised to find out how much leadership the women had in that Indian community. It was great.
Another one you would have been a member of was the Cooperative Services for the Disabled.
I wasn't on that too long.
Right.
But we did try to help people who needed it.
One that I found very interesting, the Fair Employment Practices Commission for
Yes.
Georgia. I wasn't aware that we had an FEPC.
Yes, we did. And we had that was probably, I don't know why, I'm sitting here thinking, but I can't remember why. But we had more conflict on that commission than any that I think I ever served.
I can imagine.
But I wish I could tell you more detail. I'm sorry.
No, it's okay. The Human Relations Commission.
Yes.
The governor's Human Relations
Yes,
Commission.
that was a good one too.
What did that entail? Because with a name like that, it could be anything.
Well, it was, but we tried to keep people, like state employees that might be losing their job for one reason or another. We worked on that, I remember, and other things, but I have to apologize for the 100th time. The memory is not what it used to be.
No need. And the last one is the Georgia Holocaust
Oh,
Commission.
yes, the Georgia Holocaust. I served on that for a long time, and we tried to educate Georgians about the Holocaust because there's some people stupidly thinking it never happened, but it did. And it was a horrible thing. And it wasn't just the Jews that were persecuted.
Right.
There were other factions that were persecuted also. And so I felt very good about serving on that commission.
Do you know how that commission came to be?
It was under one of the governors of Georgia who was a Democrat, because who was the first Republican governor that came in right after that?
Sonny Perdue.
Well, anyhow, I got kicked off. But I felt like I did good while I was on it, and that's all I could ask for.
Sure. You worked with a lot of the governors. Did you have much interaction with Georgia senators and representatives?
Just Culver Kid. I had a lot of interaction with Culver.
Well, by senators, I should have been more specific. Like Herman Talmadge or Sam Nunn.
Sam Nunn, he was a good friend. He and his wife, we were very good friends. And when he was going to run for president, I was so excited, but he finally decided. I remember one morning I was at a small breakfast with him, and he decided he just wasn't going to do it. I think it was, he said, because of his children.
Well, it was was it Roland McElroy's book, The Best President We Never Had, and it's about Sam Nunn. Because that would have been, he would have run for president in 1988. That was when he was, and it would have been in Atlanta and everything.
Right.
But
I think there were signs for Nunn.
there were, we have several pictures, I believe, of yours.
And buttons, too.
Mm-hmm.
I may have given you one, I don't know.
I can see red buttons, white letters, Nunn 88, I believe is what they said. Now, did you work with any of the senators or get to know? Weich Fowler was senator for a few years.
No, just friends, but not real close friends. But he was from Atlanta, as I recall.
He was.
But just friends.
Okay, well, let's zoom out a little bit, and I wonder if we can ask some big picture questions. Why do you think the Democrats in Georgia were able to hold on to power so long?
Well, we gave the public what they wanted.
What was that?
Well, I think they wanted good jobs. They wanted food on the table. I'm sounding like a real politician now. But they wanted what everybody wanted, and they got it, and that was the important thing. And then the Republicans came in. They had more money, I think, than we had, and they got elected.
So why do you think it took the Republican Party in Georgia so long?
Well, I think they were being imported. They came in, they settled in Georgia, they found out it was a wonderful place to live, and they got their friends to come, they got their families to come, and they outnumbered us. And that's how they got elected, with their money.
So how do you think, over the years that you were active, how do you think the Democratic Party of Georgia changed in terms of its composition, its membership, its views?
Well, I think we became more people of color joined us, which was very important, and it should have happened before that, but it didn't. But it's wonderful now. And what was your other part of that question?
How it may have changed its views or its ideology.
Well, I think when you bring any new
time.
group in or different people, they have other views than you have, and you iron them out and you go the best direction.
Now, obviously, you're not a Republican, so you'd be answering this as a bystander or an observer. But how do you think the Republican Party of Georgia has changed since you got active?
I know nothing about the Republican Party of Georgia, and I know nothing about Georgia politics anymore. So, it's difficult to answer that.
Well, back in the day, they used to say, "I'm not a national Democrat. I'm a Georgia Democrat." That Sam Nunn, for example, would say that, or Jimmy Carter would say that. What do you think they meant by when they would say, "I'm a Georgia Democrat," not like those Democrats up in Massachusetts?
I don't know what their thinking was, but I knew what they meant.
And what did they mean?
They just meant they were good old boys.
Do you think that's such a distinction if somebody went around and said, "I'm a Georgia Democrat," that would mean anything anymore these days?
I don't think it would mean anything today either.
You said you don't follow Georgia politics anymore, but maybe this is a South-wide question. But why do you think it's so hard for Democrats to win in states like Georgia anymore?
Well, I guess one is the population. I think there are more Republicans in Georgia now than there used to be. And I think the Democrats I don't know how they're running their campaigns now. I just don't know. But I think the money that the Republicans are putting into TV ads and things like that is making a difference.
Mm-hmm. We're in a period of what we would call extreme partisanship.
Absolutely.
Extreme polarization. Do you think there are issues that Democrats and Republicans can work on to find solutions these days?
I think there are. I'm not exactly sure what they may be, but I think the biggest issue for both parties right now is Donald Trump.
What do you mean by that exactly?
What do I mean?
Sure.
Do you ever watch television? Do you
sometimes.
ever read the newspaper or pick up a magazine? Well, if you do, I don't think I have to answer that.
Good enough. So what do you think, let's put on your thinking cap and your crystal ball, what do you think Georgia politics or politics looks like 10, 20 years down the road?
I don't know for sure, but I hope we'll get more people interested in voting, whether they're Republican or Democrat. We've got to get people to the polls. Mm-hmm. We've got to save our country. You've got to get there and elect good people, not people that are going to embarrass us or anything like that, but good, substantial people, men or women, white or color, it doesn't matter.
Do you miss being active in politics?
I did in the beginning, but now it's just a pleasure to sit back and just listen.
Well, you did mention that you did do some phone banking.
I did get active for Hillary. The last election, I worked the phone bank up here and enjoyed it. I thought we had it made, but we sure didn't.
So what obviously Sheryl and I know, but maybe others don't know, is that you were the first woman to donate your papers to the Richard B. Russell Library.
I didn't know that. Sheryl never told me that. She just asked for them. And I've got 2 boxes for you to take home.
That's right. That's part of the reason we're here. But tell me, why did you think it was important to donate your papers and to preserve your experiences?
Well, at first I was flattered that she asked me, and I did have all these papers, but let me go back a bit.
Yeah.
Right after I'd gotten on the Democratic Party thing, somebody called me and said, we're going to ask you, and they were from the Democratic Party, I think. I have no idea who it was. We want you to save your papers and things for the future generations because you're an active Democratic woman. And I said, really? They said, yeah, so please start saving your material. I said, okay, and I did. And that's why you've got all that early stuff. I hope it'll help someday.
Well, that's a good question. What do you hope that future students or researchers or men or women getting involved in politics, what do you hope they could learn from your early experiences?
I really don't know how to answer that. I can't criticize myself too badly, so I'm just going to say I'll let them figure it out.
Well, Sheryl, do you have any questions?
I do want to ask, I want to go back and talk a little bit about family again, Maxine.
Yeah.
I know that Jake was very close to Representative Carl Vinson's family.
Oh, yes.
Would you tell us a little bit about that? Because there aren't that many Carl Vinson papers left, and I think it's just it's good for us to know a little bit about what he did in Milledgeville.
Right. Well, first, I asked for some papers from Carl Vinson, the person that inherited them, and I got a no. So I didn't have those, or they would have been with your papers. Right. But Carl Vinson was a mainstay in Milledgeville, Georgia. He'd walk the streets with his hat, and he knew everybody. Everybody loved Carl Vinson. And Jake was born in the house that Carl Vinson had lived in before he moved out to the farm. And Jake said, one day we were riding by, and he said, Maxine, I was born in that room right there, the front room. I said, really? Later on, I had an occasion with Mr. Vinson to be passing the same room. I said, Jake was born in that room, Mr. Vinson. Maxine, he was not. He was born across the hall. I said, okay, I wasn't going to get into that fight with him. He used to call me Mrs. Democrat. Here comes Mrs. Democrat. We would see him a lot. And when the governors would come to Milledgeville, we would always take them by to see Carl Vinson.
And he lived to be, almost 100?
I think
100
so.
Or so.
He was a wonderful man. He did a lot for our community. He did a lot for the United States, and I think he did a lot for our Navy.
I think they call him the father of the two-ocean Navy.
Navy, that's right. That's right.
One representative from Milledgeville,
and I'll tell you,
Georgia.
One good thing happened. When Jake was in the war, he was going to be transferred from, I think, New Orleans to someplace in Panama, and the news said a troop ship had gone down. Well, Jake's mother and father were hysterical. They thought Jake was on that ship. So they called Mr. Vinson. In an hour, he called back and says, relax, he was not on that ship.
That's a good.
Isn't
That's a
that
good story.
something?
Right. Well, I was thinking that actually Mr. Vinson was a mentor for Jake. Is that not so?
Yes, he loved the Goldsteins. He really, and the Goldsteins loved him. And he would call the store once a year for his workers and said, "Send me the uniforms. I need so many in so many sizes." And we did. We always did.
So you worked in the store as
I
well?
didn't. I helped when they needed me.
Okay. You were reinforcements for the
That's
holiday
right.
season
That's
and stuff
right.
like that.
Jake also went to the Georgia Military Academy, and I
Oh,
think he was very
Georgia Military College.
college, right?
Yes.
And he was very involved, an active alumni for that school as well. After he was
Oh
living
yeah,
in
he was
Milledgeville
very
again.
active in it, and he said it saved his life. He went in at the time he was called to service during World War II. He was 18, and it was on record. He was the youngest lieutenant, a second lieutenant to be drafted, or whatever. At that time, it didn't last long because there were others coming in right behind him day
Sure.
by day. But at one time, he was that way, and he went into the Army. And Mr. Vinson was very kind to the Goldsteins when they were worried about Jake.
Do you remember what unit he served in?
71st, Patton's Third Army.
Patton's Third
And-
Army. Okay.
He was down at the. This is if you want a little army.
Absolutely.
He was in Panama, and as a lieutenant, he was overseeing the soldiers lighting the smoke pots so the Japanese, when they flew over, couldn't find the Panama Canal. And he had that job, and he said it was boring, but he did his job. All of a sudden, that one day, the general's car comes, and they want him to get in. The general wants to see him. He said, "Maxine, I knew one of my parents had died or something awful had happened in Milledgeville." And he got there, and the general says, "Goldstein, I want you to take over the officers' mess." Jake says, "General, I don't know how to cook. I don't know anything." He says, "You took chemistry." He says, "Yes, we were the only one here that took chemistry, so you're going to get the job." So Jake was very good with people. He said, "Well, is there anybody working there now that can help me?" He said, "Well, there's this guy that used to run a restaurant in New York City, and he'll come and he'll be by your side." Well, he and Jake worked it out. They loved what Jake did. The officers' wives wanted to have little parties. No, this was when they moved to Denver, Colorado. This is a funny story to me. They would say, "Now, Jake, we don't want to pay any more than $2.50, but we want a drink first. We want a filet. We want the steak. We want the salad. And we want a wonderful dessert. Can you do that?" He said, "Oh, absolutely." So they went up a nickel each on the drinks at the Officers Club.
I have one more question,
Sure.
and I don't know how much you might want to talk about this, or maybe not. But you mentioned earlier that Harriet died from breast cancer, and I know that you started a charity called Harriet's Closet.
Yes.
And I would like for you to talk just a little bit
Well,
about what
this
the
is
idea
what we did
was
with
there.
that. When Harriet passed away, we wanted to do something where in Milledgeville. Now, she moved to Atlanta. She lived in Atlanta, but we lived in Milledgeville. So we started Harriet's Closet. It's a free closet for anybody that has cancer. You can be white, black, or polka dot. It doesn't matter. You come in, you pick out. We've got wigs, prosthesis. We've got things for men, women, and children. They come in, they get whatever they want, and they can take it home free. And only thing we ask sometimes is if you don't need your wigs anymore, we sterilize them and fix them. I've done many of them and put them back in stock. And they've been real kind. We've got a building, part of the building right next to, connected to the cancer center in Milledgeville that they gave us, the hospital did. And the new people, Navasant, I think is the name of the group, that has taken over, and they've been just as kind and wonderful to us about keeping Harriet's Closet there. And that's something we feel real good about. Mm-hmm. When you can help people that need help, I don't care if you can afford to buy it, we're going to give it to you.
That's great. That's great. Well, Sheryl, is there anything else?
I can't think of anything right now. I'm just so glad that you took this time to sit down with us. It took us a long time to get to this point, but better late than never.
That's right. It's almost too late, but I'm doing my best.
Well, I think if I am privileged enough to live to 92, I hope I have half your energy.
Oh.
Because I think it's absolutely fantastic. Well, is there anything else that you would like to record for posterity and for history?
Well, one thing that I did like as a Democrat, it was a magazine in Washington. I've forgotten the name of it again, but it took about 8 or 10 of us to Russia to talk to the Russians about democracy.
Okay.
Now, Jake went with me on this trip, but we were there, and they were having a big thing for the students and the public in this huge hall if they could get there. Well, the government closed down the subway right next to the thing because they didn't want the people to come to hear us. So they went to the next subway and had to walk quite a ways to get into this building. And they came piling in. Most of them were students. And they were some other people. And they filled up the place and they started asking questions. And I had an interpreter who sat, I've got a picture on the wall of that, but anyhow, I was talking under the picture of Lenin. It was very interesting. And so we talked, and they all wanted to know just how to raise money if you want to be elected. They were trying to be elected. And one of the fellows said, well, you have this big party and you charge this much and blah, blah, blah. Then they asked me to, we went, Republican and Democrats were both on this trip. So they called me up. I said, well, let me tell you what we do. We get a few people to come to our house and sit in the kitchen, and we drink coffee and eat cake, and we ask for a ruble or two, just 1 ruble or 2, and that's how we build up our stash to run for office. They liked that. They didn't like that other. That guy he was from California, and he thought everybody had money.
The importance of small dollar donors.
That's very important. It really is. And one day they've got to do something to control those donations.
Well, Maxine, I think that's a really good place to leave off. And on behalf of Sheryl and myself, thank you very much for taking this time to talk to us about your life and your history and your husband and family. We really do appreciate it.
Well, I thank you for coming and remembering me. It's been a long time, and I certainly hope this will help somebody in some way.
Thank you very much.